Greetings, ladies and gentlemen. I wanted to be able to make a few clarifications about a few things that I talk about as it relates to law enforcement. You can agree, you can disagree, you can open it up to debate, or you can tell me that I've gone to the dark side. All of those are perfectly fine, but I would prefer if you asked me questions relating to something if you don't understand, rather than just making assumptions. The first thing that I wanted to say is that as law enforcement relates to the citizen, there is a certain relationship that was originally created, to the best of my estimation. And that is something that very few people in government like to hear from the citizens. And that is something called the servant-master relationship. What this means is, and the way I say it isn't from a position of arrogance. It's from a position of truth. It is something that should be understood as the origin of any government entity that is actually created. It has certain powers, it has certain authorities, and it has certain limitations that cannot be exceeded under certain conditions. The expansion of policy, for example, through the expansion of policy as it relates to law, or in the name of law, is not law. Law has to have certain requirements. Number one, it has to be done by Article 3 of the state legislature, and number two, it has to be able to have an enactment clause to be able to put it into place. Merely placing a policy in effect, saying that it's okay for something to happen, is just not the way that it does. And in reality, in the name of enforcing the law, it's actually not at all. As a matter of fact, it's the opposite. The other thing that I wanted to mention is something called the spirit of the law and the letter of the law. Most of us that have studied the Constitution and the Declaration of Independence understand that the Declaration of Independence has been understood to be the spirit of the law. This is actually, if you had any question on how the Constitution was actually applied, you would understand, you'd have to read the Constitution to understand it in better context, and why it was actually written, and what kinds of protections they expected from the creation of the Constitution. Any idea, without the understanding of the fact that the spirit and the letter of the law actually go hand in hand, it allows government to be able to obtain boundless authority that it never had, with the boundless authority to be able to delegate authority that it never had. The other thing that I want to consider too is that there is an attempt by conspiracy to be able to abandon our American form of government. And every government agency and most people that listen to the media are actually in support of it. When they talk about, well, you need to obey the law and you can't go 1 mile an hour with the speed limit because it's over the state statute, and the state statute is law even though it was created by the legislature, it abandons several things. One of them is that it abandons the knowledge of what happened when the speed limits were actually created. See, I'm not against speed limits. I am against having law enforcement officers hiding in unmarked cars with their lights off behind a bush waiting for you to screw up. It completely reverses the whole servant-master relationship. I understand that if somebody endangers somebody else on the road, that is maybe a cause for them to act. But for the ability of violating a law by going 1 mile an hour over the speed limit restricts the most fundamental principle of our freedom to travel. And it is a right, trust me. According to our law, it is a right to travel. They will tell you that it is not. If government was created to protect life, liberty, and property, and our unalienable rights, which cannot be taken away, then their job is to be able to protect and preserve our rights, right? Our liberties. If they don't have knowledge of these principles, how can they do that? Many law enforcement have never read the Constitution. They think that the supreme law is the state statutes. Well, that's wrong. What happens if the state statutes that are created by the legislature aren't lawful law? There are such things that the Supreme Court has declared, that any law repugnant to the Constitution is null and void. Where did that understanding actually go? And what does that actually mean? Well, if any law that is created by any agency or political subdivision has full and force and effect of law without being law, we're actually a lawless environment where government, in the name of the law, is acting lawlessly. This is very, very dangerous. The one thing, too, that a lot of people don't, and I can go on forever on this, so I'm going to try to keep it short. we are in danger. Law enforcement and the citizens are in absolute danger. And the animosity between law enforcement and the citizens is increasing because of the fact that very few people are unaware of the federalization or globalization of law enforcement under the Strong Cities Network, for example. Acronym is SCN. The United Nations is planning on federalizing or globalizing law enforcement in their effort to be able to create a regional government moving toward a one world global government, which used to be called a conspiracy theory, which is now real and easy to see. A lot of the understanding or the misunderstanding in things comes from people's irresponsibility. You know, we haven't been taught civics. We haven't been taught our moral duties as citizens. We haven't been taught, or we're not perpetuating the principles of self-government and the ability to take personal responsibility for our own actions. A lot of people like myself that are understanding that things are completely out of whack have completely set aside logic and common sense, and they're acting out of emotion rather than sitting down and trying to communicate our way out of this. You got to remember, it took us over 100 years to get here. There's no way we're going to restore proper government tomorrow. And if there's ever ability to be able to do it, we've got to try, and giving up is not an option. So those are a couple of the notes I had. You know, law enforcement will typically say when you get pulled over, you know, if you question them about, you know, the Constitution and all that, like we've all done, law enforcement needs to understand that we don't do that to be able to piss them off. We do that to be able to try to find a peaceable way to be able to restore that servant-master relationship and have them go home and start questioning what it is that we're doing without thinking that we're acting lawlessly in doing it. The one thing that law enforcement, I think, does that exacerbates the problem is that for those of us that realize that Idaho's judiciary is rather a joke, the answer is not to tell the person that is questioning them about their lawful authority to be able to go to the judiciary. I think it makes it worse. What I think they should probably do instead, and might yield better results, is to be able to tell them to take it up with the legislature. And the reason for this is because it pokes the eye back in the person that's asking the questions. So if you have somebody that's ignorant of our Constitution and our rights, for example, and questions law enforcement and tells them that their rights are being violated because they've been detained because that's what they heard somewhere, and they can't articulate what they mean, and law enforcement says take it up with the judiciary, but this person actually has been through the court process and knows what it's like, the missing link here is the fact that dollars to donuts, that guy that has been questioned has not even been part of the political process. He hasn't been involved in voting. He hasn't been involved in vetting his candidates. He hasn't been involved in anything relating to those that actually write the law that law enforcement actually enforces. And the other thing that's really important to know too is law enforcement says two different things, okay? One of them, they'll say that, well, we're just enforcing the law, and then the other one says that they actually have discretion. Well, you can't have both. If you allow the discretion, then and that is actually consistent with any law repugnant to the Constitution is null and void, that's where that discretion should come from. It shouldn't come from how they feel that day or any of those things. And I'm not saying this to be detrimental to law enforcement or anything else. As a matter of fact, I support local police because I would prefer local police and dealing with the issues locally than I would with a globalized or nationalized police force under a totalitarian dictator, which it appears that we're getting or have. So a lot of it deals with misunderstanding. I believe that I've got a few things that I believe that I've done some research on, I've communicated with to be able to help bridge that communication gap that will actually help us understand that there's an enemy amongst us that wants us to fight. The best way that we can do this is to be able to work together, to be able to help us understand one another, but we've got to do it in a way where we can be receptive. If we don't, we're justifying the need for local police to be federalized because they feel like they are going to be overwhelmed with the amount of dissent that they're facing. So I urge everybody to consider supporting local police. If you guys have a question, you can call me, you can email me, you can Facebook me. My number is 208-861-6405. Feel free to call me, text me, what have you. Let's look out for law enforcement. Let's help educate one another. And if there's any restoring the republic, let's see if we can do that. Talk to you later, guys. Love you. Bye.